The melody of Prohibition was changing its tune. From the downbeat of the 18th Amendment, the activity across the lake had been anchored by the fishermen. As the decade wore on, new players entered the scene. Some were everyday fathers looking to provide for their loved ones, and others held allegiance to a different kind of family, seeking profit above all else. By the arrival of the Great Depression, the excess of the Roaring Twenties shifted to a sparse and somber key. Nevertheless, as the times changed, a few bright characters made the best of their circumstances. After years of rum running and the increase of raids down by the docks, the fisheries, like Colby's, were no longer safe harbors. In their place, some found shelter in the cover of night along the shores east of Erie.
So the good thing for the lake and for the biomass of all the fish was we took the pressure off the fish for a year by focusing our attention and running booze, and the fish started to come back. Of course, that was a short-term recovery, and we ended up sort of destroying all those species by overfishing them. But that meant we needed a new technology for bringing the booze to Erie, at least. And Erie was the hinterlands. How you would get booze in Detroit or how you would get booze in Buffalo, those were different animals because they were both on rivers. So rivers that, at least in the case of Detroit, would freeze over. So you could take an old car and put bolts in the wheels and run back and forth with alcohol. And there were the same issues there with the police that were interested or the police that weren't interested. But how are you going to get booze in Erie? And the answer was fast boats.
And the boats were built, actually, if I pointed across, right over there, many of them. The boatyard, the Gamble boatyard, constructed them. The originator or original builder was a fellow called George Gamble. And George Gamble built boats there for many years. Many of them have ended up in Erie.
My grandfather was a shipbuilder. He's a very smart man. He invented a lot of things. He was always building something. He was never, always had to do one thing or another. And he had patents, and oh, by the way, he was related to Thomas Edison, a distant cousin to Thomas Edison also. My grandfather was a boat builder in Port Dover, and during the Prohibition, he was the one that looked after the rum-running boats and put the Liberty airplane engines in the boats.
The Liberty engine was actually the product of a great bit of cooperation between the three big car manufacturers in the States. They all got together to produce this 12-cylinder lightweight engine for a fighter called the SE-5, and because it was light because it was for an airplane, but this also made it ideal for a boat.
Preserved for decades in waters deep, a Liberty engine prototype was recovered by two enterprising divers in 1985.
The 15 V8, today there's only 3 of them left. One sits at the Air and Space Museum in DC, one is at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, and one that sits here in Coney Lake on Liberty II, and this is the only one of the 3 that actually runs. The Liberty engine, at about 57 miles an hour, the torque of the motor pulls the boat to the left and it turns right. And we've been informed that if we have 100 gallons of alcohol on the right-hand side of the boat, it counterbalances the torque of the motor and goes true blue down the lake. It was good for rum running because most things didn't go 78 miles an hour unless you was an airplane.
Gamble was a airplane mechanic during World War I, and he was quite familiar with Liberty engines. And then he added a special Gamble technique. He had a button that you could push, and when you got up to high RPMs, you push this button and it squirted castor oil inside the engine. And one of the unknown knowns amongst aficionados of World War I flying aces, they would all end up with diarrhea. That you just knew you're gonna go flying, and the stress and the castor oil would cause you to come back, you know, with diarrhea-soaked clothing. That was one of the ugly parts of that. Gamble was able to fix it so that that didn't happen in those fast boats.